Welcome to this quick tutorial looking at the 3D modeling room inside of 3D Code 2021 4.3. To access the room, on the splash screen here, you click on the Poly Modeling section here. And when we enter this space, you'll know you're in there because it says Modeling at the top here. Hitting this little triangle will drop down all the other rooms that are available to you, but for now we'll stay in this room. So what we've got here is essentially a blank space where we can start to place our objects into, and I'm going to start off here by choosing a 3D primitive here and choosing a cube. So you can see here that it's placed an initial cube for us to start with. What I'm going to do with using the gizmo here is just scale it up. And I'm going to reduce the subdivision level to 0. And I do that inside of the tools options here where we've got average division count. So if I move it to the right, I will increase. And if I move it to the left, I will reduce that down to a single face. So with that selected now, one thing we need to go over is what's actually happening here. You can see here that the cube is initially orange, which means it's pretty much a placeholder at the moment. It's waiting for me to do something with this cube in order to place it inside the scene. So I can just leave it as it is, or I can change its shape. I'm going to leave it as it is for now and simply hit apply. Once I've done that, the cube changes its color to a green. The placeholder is still active, but it's kind of underneath here, and the gizmo tells me that it's underneath there. So if I choose the gizmo and pull out the proxy object, you can see it's still in the scene, ready for me to place another cube or another object up here into the scene. The placed cube is this green one behind it. So this is our active cube ready for modeling, and this is the placeholder. So at the moment, I'm kind of happy with the simple cube as it is. But what I want to do now is I want to try and put some Boolean cuts into this model. So I have to start off by changing the shape of this one, and let's make it a different shape, just slightly, something like this, and move it in and position it somewhere like that. And if I change this operator here to say subtract, and I hit apply, you'll see it makes a Boolean cut inside. So I'll do a few more of these just to demonstrate. I'll move it over. I'll change the shape again, something a bit wider maybe, maybe a bit higher up. There's my second one. The geometry on here is not great, but it's something we can live with for now. It really depends on what you're going to be using this for. So here I am. I'm just going to make a couple more of these cuts in here. We'll try one on the corner, so I'll move one up. Just trim the edge of this corner down. And you'll notice there's some errors on there. It's clipped that one. If I turn it off and on again, sometimes it means you can just adjust them. So if I bring this on over here, maybe, yeah, it was happier with that cut than it was with that. If you notice that face is now intact. So it's not perfect, but it's quite an interesting tool. I'll reduce that down, do one more, just bevel, cut into there, like so. So the other option I can do on here is using this cube. I can continue, and let's move it over onto this side, and you choose this face here. I'll just move it down here, scale it up, and I'll choose the fillet option. And you can see now I've got a filleted edge. So now I'll just cut into this green cube, like so, and you can see I did a pretty good job of cutting that out. So another option we could try, we could choose a different shape now. Let's choose this capsule shape. We'll scale it up so it's no longer a capsule, it's more like a sphere. And I'll quickly just rotate it. Let's move it over to a cleaner side. Let's move it over here. And then move it down. And just position it down here. Just roughly stick it in there. So, placing it there, you can see where it's going to make the cut. Hit subtract. And I'll turn this tool off now. And let's just assess what it did. I'll just turn this grid off. Yeah, not too bad. It's a good starting point, at least, as for architectural kind of models, if that's what you're trying to make, or very basic blockouts. So the next thing, we'll choose the select tool. And with the select tool, you get the three options here, verts, edges, and faces. We'll choose faces. And I'll select some faces on here. You can see it highlights those, make sure they're all selected. And then what I can do is I can start to change this geometry from this base. So I'll choose this option, Smart Boolean, and with those objects selected, it's realized which ones I want to do. And so if I do a double click on the surface and then literally left click and pull, then I'll pull that surface up and extrude it. If I want to sort of scale this one, I'll use my right mouse button to scale it, left mouse button to move it around. Then if I want to do another extrusion, double click and pull another extrusion up. Now you also notice this little pivot point in the middle. This is a little bit like the 3D cursor, I suppose, inside of Blender. And if I just tap once on a corner here, for example, and then extrude from there, what will happen is, let's do that again, there, and what will happen is if I hold the shift down, I'll now start to rotate this new extrusion out from this pivot point. If I let go of shift and click on the surface and pull, then I will move that away from there. So now I've got this going on. So that's a really useful thing that I can use that as a pivot point to start my modeling process. So at this point I will just deselect all these objects by hitting Control D, and I'll go back to the points selection here, and I can start to modify this geometry on a points basis. So hit space on the keyboard, select move. So I've got verts selected and I'm moving those verts around. You can see that I can now start to shape this model. And I can just sort of tweak it using edges or faces. Okay, so let's say that's done, and that's the model I wanted to do. But what if I wanted to do something a little bit more with this in terms of maybe sculpting on it? So the way that works is we need to send this object to the Sculpt space. As you remember, we're in the modeling room now. So if I go over to the Sculpt space, you'll notice that my model's disappeared. It's no longer here. It's actually is present, but in the modeling room. So I need to get it over into here. The way I do that is by simply, I'll go back to the modeling room. There's my object. The way that I do this is I use this menu here. Let's bring this one out. Whoops. Go to Windows, Panels, and we'll find Sculpt Models. And I've got here a folder that's set up by pressing this plus sign here to create a new folder and give it a name. And then all I need to do with this new folder is, if you notice up here, we've got this polygroup 1 layer. If I turn this on and off, you'll notice that the model I made disappears. So let's give it a name. Let's just call it model. 01. So we know that this is our low poly model. And you notice when I hover over this layer, I've got these 6 dots to the right. And when I move over those dots, I get this cursor change to a move cursor. So it's implying it needs to be moved somewhere. And that's why we've got this little palette here for it to drop into. So what I'll do is I'll drag it and drop it. And you'll notice it drops in this object. Now this object now could be transported. So think about this as kind of like a temporary storage area where it's going to be transported to the next room. This will always remain in here in its location, but this one is like a duplicate that we'll take and do something else with that. So I'll now go to the sculpt space. The model disappears because remember it's back in the other room. And now if I click on this object, it will bring in that same object as a proxy object into the Sculpt workspace, hence it being this orange color. So now it's waiting for me to do something with this inside of this new Sculpt space. And there's a number of things that I can do with it. First of all, the tool options panel that you've got is really important when you're importing things in. So you'll notice this is the most important one here. It's called import without voxelization, which means it will bring it in as a surface or polygon object, a low-res polygon object, similar to what we made in the modeling room. Our other option is to deselect this and then bring it in as a voxel object, and you can see that the estimated poly count for a voxel object of this one to maintain its shape, it's estimating it's going to need well over 1.5 million polygons to recreate this shape in here and to keep it as nice and clean and sharp as it is. What I'm going to do at first is just deselect that one and actually select this one. So it's now going to import this object as a surface or polygon object. And we'll do that simply by clicking Add. Also notice that the same options here that we had in the other room are available to me in here, which means I can go on Boolean cutting these in. So having selected that one, I'll say yes. And you'll notice it's just gone into wireframe mode to show me that this object is now a low polygon object inside this Sculpt workspace. So if I was to sculpt on this now, it wouldn't look very good because there's not enough resolution in there to do that. So if I hit W on the keyboard, I'll get back to my shaded view, and you'll notice that we haven't got quite the right shader set up for this. It's a little bit the normals are not acting correctly. So I want to see a cleaner version of this. So I'll use the shader here, and I'll select this particular shader, and I've just set this one up so it's flat shaded is the term it uses. And just to show you how to do that, you right click onto a shader and you'll go to edit the shader properties, and you'll make sure under the shader settings that flat shading is selected. I won't make another one because that's fine. So you'll see I get a much cleaner version, and it's kind of more representative of the polygon level that's in there rather than trying to smooth it all out as the previous one was doing. So at this point I've got a low polygon object in a Sculpt workspace, which isn't really that much use to me. So what I'll do is I'll just delete this one and make something a little bit more appropriate for sculpting. So I will do that by there's my object, I will just delete that one. Click back onto this object again to bring in a fresh one. Again, I get my yellow color indicating a proxy object, so it needs me to do something. And this time, with this one selected, I'll hit flat subdivision, and watch this number here. As I hit the flat subdivision, it starts to go up, so I can start to increase the subdivision, and that should do. And now if I hit apply, and I'll just change the tool, you can see that now it's brought in an object, And if I hit W on my keyboard to see the wireframe, you'll see it's a much denser object because it's been subdivided however many times we did that. So we've got a try count down here of 313,000 roughly. Okay, so hit W again to get back into the shaded view, and at this point I can take my stylus, for example, come in with a clay draw brush, and I can start to sort of manipulate this. I'll turn that up and I can start to sculpt on this one. Change the tool by hitting spacebar and use a move tool. Increase the size of my brush by hitting the left mouse button, and I can start to sort of pull this shape around. Now, depending on what you want to do with these shapes, obviously if I wanted to sculpt some detail on and then bake that back down to that low poly version that I have in the modeling room, there are ways to conform the mesh in here to the retopo mesh. It's something different, and it's something we'll go over in a later video, but we have to make sure that whatever we're doing in there is going to be able to transfer over to the low poly if that's the workflow that we're doing. If, for example, we just wanted to create something, a model, and then bring it in here to take out and sculpt, then we're fine to just change the properties of this around wherever we want to. So we can see here now that if let's go and just change very quickly to a different brush, do a little bit more. We can change our shader on here. We can see what sort of disaster we're making of this, and using the shift button whilst we're sculpting smooths it out. So we can change the shaders and sort of evaluate our work that way. So you notice as well we've got this S, which represents the surface mode or polygon mode of this mesh that we've got here. I did mention another one, which was the Voxel mode. So let's look at that one now. I'll just delete this one that I've got here by hitting delete. So what we have now is that we're going to have a look and see how we can bring this in as a voxel object. So I've just clicked on this object in this Sculpts model palette, and I've unchecked the import without voxelization, and you'll notice here it's given me an estimated poly count here of 1,800,000. We'll go with that and see what happens. It may not crash, we don't know. So if I hit apply on here, it's going to give me this box here to say, do you want me to maintain the size, which we do. So at this point, I will just click off there, and you'll notice now that we have a try count down here of 1,855,000. If I zoom in on here, hit W, we've got this extremely dense mesh, but this is now a different kind of 3D object. I'll just move this one out of the way, which is now a voxel object. Again, my PBR shaders will all work on this one as well. So here I can come in and I can use voxel tools to start to do my sculpting on here. Now, I won't go too much into this, but you can see that we've got all these alphas and things that we can use, and if we just again use the move brush, select one of these alphas, and we can start to pull these things out. It's different shape, and we can start to manipulate our voxelized mesh now based on that initial model that we made at the beginning. So that's a brief look. So all we've done, just to summarize, is we've created a model in the modeling room. We've used some Booleans to cut out some various shapes and give us, and then extruded some shapes out. And then we've tried two different methods of bringing that object into the Sculpt Workspace using the Sculpt Objects palette as a transporter, and we've brought those objects in both as a surface object, pretty much like what you get inside of ZBrush, and then we brought it in as a voxel object, which is pretty similar as a Dynamesh type of object that you get in ZBrush as well. So I hope you found that useful, and see you in the next video.